are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Bridget.
And today we are looking at Casablanca, the Patreon pick of February. It is directed by Michael Curtiz and starring Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. And Bridget, why don't you hit us with a plot summary?
Yeah, Casablanca tells us the story of a cynical expatriate American cafe owner who struggles to decide whether or not to help his former lover and her fugitive husband escape the Nazis in French Morocco.
So yeah, what an intriguing for a romance movie. We'll talk about more of that later. But for now, let's have some fun facts about this movie. So the director, Michael Curtiz, which I honestly did not make this connection, he also directed White Christmas with Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye, and The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. But this is probably his most well-known film. But I just found that funny that he directed both of those. I love both of those movies.
Yes.
We talked about White Christmas not too long ago.
Yep, I had no idea, honestly, until I read that in our doc that was even, like, can you imagine having a career where you direct White Christmas and Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, and you can say, yeah, but I still have a more famous movie.
Yeah, Casablanca.
Okay, all right, Michael Curtiz.
The most well-known movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, and this movie was also nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and it took home a couple in 1944. It took home the Oscar for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, those were the writers. So, more fun facts, it was a pretty good Oscar winner as well.
Yes, yeah. I thought it was worth mentioning here as well. Maybe not so much a fun fact, but just worth noting. And for this section, I have to give a shout out to my friend Gwen. Gwen is my movie watching friend. So every time I'm prepping for a Popcorn Theology episode, Gwen is my go-to. Watch this movie with me and tell me what to talk about. So yay, Gwen, thank you for this. She pointed out to me that the actor, his name is, I believe, Conrad Veidt. He played Major Strasser, who is the lead Nazi in this film. And I know we're in our pre-spoiler section, so I'm going, if you are watching or listening to this episode, I will dance around some of these spoilery details so I don't give too much away if anybody hasn't seen it yet. And so he agreed to portray this Nazi character because he actually was married to a Jewish woman. His wife was Jewish, and they had to flee Germany. He was a very well-known actor in Germany, and Casablanca ended up being his final film of his career. Yeah. So a very poignant, I think, and lovely note about that man and his career. And many of the other actors in this movie also had real-life connections to World War II. The man who played Karl, the waiter, was a Hungarian Jewish man who also fled Nazi Germany, and he actually lost 3 sisters in a concentration camp. Oh, man. Yeah. The actor who plays the Bulgarian roulette player himself spent time in a concentration camp and then fled to America after he was freed from that camp. The actor who played the pickpocket was also a German Jewish actor and refugee. And then finally, Michael Curtiz, the director himself, was a Hungarian Jewish immigrant. He came to America in 1926, but also had family members who were refugees from Nazi Europe. So I think that is worth noting. If you haven't seen this movie, or even if you have, go back and rewatch it for the performances of people who were affected in their own real lives by what was going on in Europe at this time in history.
Yeah. And that's like the neat thing about Casablanca too, is that it was filmed during World War II. It wasn't after. Like, this was being filmed during all of this. So it was very near and dear to the people who were making it, because it was literally happening all around them. So that's also a really interesting fact. So while we are in our spoiler-free section, we are going to give our spoiler-free popcorn thoughts on this movie. So here at Popcorn Theology, we do our ratings with stale, fresh, and buttered and salted. It's like bad, good, great. And so, in any combination of those, like butter and salted with extra butter. Which I'll go ahead and go first and say that was definitely me, like butter and salted, extra butter. Um, I love this movie. I really do think it is one of the greatest films ever made, at least in the Hollywood studio system era.
Mhm.
It has just all the elements to weave a theatrical tale just made for the screen. It's just the stunning and seemingly at odds to the romance story is this noir cinematography and just really smart writing that gifts us with some of the most quoted lines in cinema history and amazing performances, not just by Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, but every secondary character in this movie honestly gives an outstanding performance that adds to the narrative. And for me, this whole movie is just like kind of that perfect mix of popular entertainment and art. And I think that if you want to know what like classic Hollywood feels like, then you watch this movie.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. This absolutely is a buttered and salted movie for me as well. I would rank it right up there with one of the best ever produced by Hollywood. One of the things that I thought was interesting that really stood out to me this time, I didn't realize this until I was doing a little bit more research about the movie over the last couple of days, that the movie is actually, the source material for the movie was actually a stage play.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really stood out to me, and it's funny because I rewatched the movie before I knew that it was based on a stage play, but on this rewatch, I was thinking about how contained this movie is. Almost the entire movie takes place in one location.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I mean, you do end up with some scenes that are outside of that location, but for the most part, we
Yeah.
have Rick's cafe, and that is really all that there is. So what struck me about that is that it's still considered to be one of the great movies by almost any metric, by any standard, that we use to judge these kinds of things, and yet it literally doesn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the days when you had to rely on a great script, you had to
Yeah.
rely on great actors and actresses to be able to carry the weight and the heft of the movie. And my goodness, do we get both of those things in this film?
Yeah.
For me, I couldn't agree with you more, Maddie. I think every single actor and actress in this movie, there's not really anybody who is forgettable in this
No.
film. Even the minor characters stick with you. For me, Claude Rains and Paul
Mm-hmm.
Heinried are the scene stealers in this one.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk more, I'm sure, about all of the characters as we get into our deeper thoughts on this one. But yeah, I love those two performances so much.
Yeah. It, from what you were saying about it all taking place in one spot, like you're right. It pretty much saw at least in just like two or three sets, honestly, like the whole
Mhm.
thing. And it makes me think of another great old movie is 12 Angry Men. If you've
Yes.
never watched that movie, oh my gosh, that's such a great movie. And it literally
Mhm.
takes place in one room, except for like two end scenes where they're going back into the courtroom. But it all
Mhm.
takes place in that jury room. And you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how do you make
Yes.
that interesting? Like, same thing for this one. Like, they still make it so interesting.
Mhm.
And even at the end, even though we're still stuck on the runway watching the plane take off, we're still in the same spot, that we kind of
Yep.
started. But
Yeah.
man, yeah, such a good
Another
movie.
Yes, another old classic that's good for that too, if you're into that kind of thing, is the Hitchcock movie Rope. That
Oh
movie
yeah.
is also based on a stage production, and it's been a long
Yep.
time since I watched that one, but I believe that entire film takes place in
In the
on one
apartment.
set in one
Yep.
location in the apartment. Yep. So if you want to see how Hollywood back, it's amazing how a contained movie does not have to be a constrained movie. You still have
No.
you can tell such a great story in one spot. And I think that's something that, with all of our CGI and our special effects and everything has to be bigger and better these days. And I think we really miss out
Yeah.
on the intimacy of just a very limited location in
Amen,
films these
sister.
days.
Amen. Yeah, I think you and I both really like the older movies a lot. I think that's why
Yes.
they let us do this one.
Yeah.
They're like, "Hey, Maddie, you like old movies? You should cover this one." I'm like, oh, who else likes old movies? Oh, Bridget likes old movies.
Yes, I do. Yep, they don't make them like that anymore.
Well, we're going to dive into our spoiler-free ratings for our theology now. So, and for those of you who may be new to us, again, kind of like with the popcorn ratings, we go with diluted, carbonated, or my cup runneth over when talking about the theological themes that we're kind of trying to get out of these films. And so, again, for this one, I'm going with the highest rating. I'm going with my cup runneth over. I definitely could go several different directions as far as themes and like diving into which ones that I wanted to explore. And again, as always, like I've seen this movie, I'm sure like over 10 times, I'm sure at this point. And yet when you watch it for popcorn theology, all of a sudden you're like, I never noticed this before. And I felt like there was a lot of that this time, especially just theologically wise, because it's always been such an iconic movie for me. Like I've always loved it, and I love the lines and quoting it and the cinematography. But this time, just like focusing, like, but is it theologically deep? And it really is. Like, no joke. Even though it's a very popular film, I really do think this one has some really interesting things to talk about. So, what do you think?
I completely agree. Again, my cup runneth over on this one as well. And just like you said, Maddie, I think there are so many different directions where you can take the conversation on this one. It's certainly, well, I was going to say it's helped. I don't know if maybe that's the right way to say it, but because it is based on actual historical events, and those historical events weren't even history at the time this movie was made, it was what people were living through right now. I think that we don't often see that, I don't think, in modern cinema a whole lot either, that we're telling the stories that are actually happening in the world right now. We tend to wait until things are over and then we tell the story. So I was kind of struck by that on this rewatch as well. So just between what was actually going on in the world and then other theological talking points that just come up through the storytelling, there really is a lot to say about this one. So I'm looking forward to digging in.
Absolutely. Well, before we dig in, we're going to get some promotion stuff here, and then we're going to go into ads, and then we will be back with the main talking points. So we just want to encourage you to like and share this episode with your friends if you like what you hear, even if you don't like what you hear, share it anyway. Let's broaden the conversation, even if it's, hating us in the comments, it still helps the algorithm. But we'd like you to like what you hear. So please, let's broaden the conversation.
And if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord.
And another quick way that you can help support us is to just rate and review us. Again, those really help people see us, and you can do it on any of your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, or you can also support us financially through Patreon.
Yes, donating just a few dollars per month will make you a patron saint. And this gives you special access to a whole host of exclusive benefits, including a Facebook group and special channel on the public Discord server. It also allows you to vote on future episodes like this one. That we got this episode because of the patron saints vote. And for our premium seating members, you get special weekly In the Lobby podcast episodes, and you can join us live when we record.
Yes, and if you guys want to know what almost won this month, it was between Casablanca and the next highest one was Twilight. So if only a couple more of you had voted for Twilight, we would have been covering Twilight instead of Casablanca. So your vote means something. So definitely get in on that Patreon tier if you want to have your voice heard in picking out future episodes for us. Anyway, well, here's looking at you kids. We'll be back after the ads.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane!
Cinemagog, The Marvelous Era. James Harleman here, the cinema guy, announcing the sequel to my first book on film and faith. Let's face it, entertainment has changed dramatically since the first book published in 2012, and comic book characters and franchises are everywhere, so I decided to set my sights on superheroes and examine the evolution of Hollywood in this follow-up to the first Cinemagog book. For example, what does Loki tell us about culture's view of God? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Infinity Saga continually align with biblical themes? In the Marvelous Era, I review each film and show not only how the individual movies express gospel parallels, but each phase essentially reveals a multi-point sermon. I also explore DC, Star Wars, the Monsterverse, and more. Without compromising scriptural truth, we can sift these stories and discover how we might reject, receive, and redeem ideas for personal reflection and Christian conversation. Also, has Hollywood's messaging gotten worse? The book explores ways these marvelous mythologies correspond with conversion, Christian living, church history, and Reformation, but I do also highlight what has been the entertainment industry's darker, indoctrinating decade, as well as toxic fandom and the dangers of immersion in pop culture that just might drown us spiritually if we're not careful. So suit up, assemble, and join me on a journey to the Infinity Saga and beyond. Cinemagogue, the Marvel Us Era. Now available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle editions. Hey, this is James, and if you're listening to Popcorn Theology, it's because you're interested in movies, or theology, or best of all, both. And that probably means you're our kind of people, sharing things in common with our community, and maybe sharing common interests our listeners and viewers would be interested in as well. So why not partner with us and advertise your business or ministry right here on Popcorn Theology? We're looking for great, like-minded sponsors and offer reasonable rates with a variety of formats to get your message out. Remember, our fans aren't mindless consumers, so they'll give you thoughtful consideration. That's a big part of what we're all about. So for more information on advertising with us, contact info@popcorntheology.com.
And we are back. And of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the world, you walked into our podcast, and we are dropping the spoiler warning as we dig deeper into Casablanca. And I really can't wait to talk about popcorn thoughts on this one specifically, because again, it's amazing how much popcorn and theology is in this one. Mm-hmm. And so it is really fun to talk about. But before we get into kind of like our favorite moments and what we loved about our popcorn ratings, I just wanted to ask a question of our viewers and you, Bridget, and that is Casablanca actually a romance movie? Is it a true romance story?
Man, oh man. To butcher one of the great quotes that comes out of this film, I was shocked when I found out that the patron saints chose this film for February. No, I mean, obviously there is romantic tension in this film. And I think, yes, we do. Yeah, we dropped the spoiler warning, so now we can talk about it. There is a love triangle in this movie. And my goodness, what a fascinating love triangle. And it is so well acted and so nuanced and just a really beautiful portrayal of, well, I suppose I would say we're so accustomed, I think, today to our romance movies, giving a very surface level treatment to these kinds of relationships. And we spoke a lot about this on our In the Lobby episodes that will still be coming out as the month of February continues. So check out more of this romance in films conversation there. But, we get movies that are so based on physical attraction and feelings and things like that in our movies today. And so when you go back and watch Casablanca, what a breath of fresh air to see real adults really struggling to figure out what love means and what love really looks like. So is it a true romance? I would say yes. And precisely because it is not a romance the way that we typically think of romance today. I think this gets at a much deeper kind of romance than what we are accustomed to.
Absolutely. I'll go into it more on my point, but I basically arrived there too, where I looked at it and I was like, at first I'm like, it's not really a romance story, to be honest, but yet it kind of is. Mm-hmm. Like, if you look at it surface level, this really isn't a love story because, spoilers, guy doesn't get the girl. They do not end up together. It's tragic in a sense. But is it? So, and again, we'll talk more about that later, but I just thought that was an interesting question because, like you said, in terms of today's movies, I don't think this movie would be made today, to be completely honest. People wouldn't get it. They'd be like, why didn't why didn't they, fly off together? Why didn't they end up, like this is not fun. This is not a rom-com.
Yeah, right.
Even though it is a very funny movie. I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, this is a very comedic movie in a sense. It's also a very dramatic movie too. It just weaves all of them together. And I just gotta say, I think this movie does have the best love triangle of all time. I mean, Rick, Ilsa, Victor will triumph Jacob, Edward, Bella every time.
Hands down. So. Yes. Yeah. And I love the way you said that too, Maddie. I think part of what I love about this movie, again, we said in the lobby episodes that they got the three women to cover the rom-com conversation and we all hate rom-coms. But what I love about this movie is that it's so hard. I don't even know, like, if there were still such a thing as DVD rental stores, where would this one go? What genre? Where would you find it in the store? Because I don't think when I think Casablanca, I'm not necessarily thinking of the love triangle. There are other things that come to my mind first. So this movie, it's beautiful. Yes. Yeah. It's such a beautiful, combining of so many different threads of stories. And I think maybe honestly, that's what makes it great. The love triangle is there, but it is not the defining element of this movie in many ways. There are so many other relationships to explore outside of just the romantic ones. So,
yeah. Well, since you're already on a roll, why don't you tell us, go more into depth on your popcorn thoughts then on this movie, now that we've got the romance question answered completely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that this was buttered and salted. Like we said, I have to point out the La Marseillaise scene in this movie. It is one of my absolute favorite movie scenes of all time. It's one that gives me goosebumps like every single time I watch it. I think that, like, to the same level, I would get goosebumps if it were the American national anthem playing in that scene. It's just, it's one of the best. So, I mean, just from a popcorn perspective, I think what speaks to me in that, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but what I love about it is that we see the triumph of courage winning in that moment. And we see very symbolically too the people who are on the right side of the equation in World War II having a moment of getting to defeat their enemy in a very peaceful way. There's no violence, nobody's getting hurt, but just symbolically getting to come out and sing the French national anthem to drown out the Nazis singing. I just adore that scene. So
it's beautiful.
I love that. So, and this gets a little bit into the theology, but I just wanted to mention, I think, again, part of what I love about that scene is that we see that all it takes is one man to stand up and to have courage in order to inspire that courage in other people as well. Not one single other person was taking action to respond to what the Nazis were doing in that scene. But as soon as Victor starts to sing, you can tell everybody else wanted to do something about it, but no one was willing to be the first one until he came out and started to lead that singing of the national anthem. And I think what's also fascinating about this movie is that we also see the other side of the coin, that unfortunately all it takes is one man to be a coward, and you can have other people follow in those footsteps as well. So we see a little bit of both of that in this film. So had to give a shout out to that scene. I also thought this was very interesting too, that we know how quotable this movie is. Some of the most famous quotes in all of Hollywood history come from this film. I thought it was really interesting when I was doing a little bit more research about it over the last couple of days, that the line "Play it again, Sam" is actually not in the movie. It's one of Hollywood's most misquoted quotes. So we do have Ilsa saying "play it again." I'm sorry. She says "play it once." Sam. Yeah. Yes. She says play it once, and then she says play it, Sam. She never says play it again, Sam. And Rick never does either. So according to the internet,
and the internet is always right.
The internet is always right. So I can say this with 100% certainty and conviction. That there is a 1972 Woody Allen film that is called Play It Again, Sam. And so I guess for whatever reason, pop culturally, a lot of people say that that's the reason why people misremember that quote from a movie that was made 30 years earlier.
Yeah, or maybe it's all the Mandela effect. Maybe it really was.
It could just be that.
Sam, and we all just been brainwashed. So,
yes.
either scenario is totally believable.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, I was actually just talking to some of my students today about the Mandela effect and some of the things that
I am honestly, no joke. It's the Berenstein Bears, not
yes,
the
I
Berenstain
know.
Bears. Like, I remember that. So, like, honestly, I think I do believe in the Mandela effect.
I know, because you want to be the person who says, no, I would never be duped by that. And then you realize that you were and you have things wrong. It's crazy.
Yes.
Um,
Oh my God.
So, and just two other really quick popcorn thoughts on this one. And just for me personally, it is so easy to romanticize the glamour of old Hollywood. Like, this is one of those movies for me that just, it is the golden age of filmmaking right there. And, it's easy to fall into that trap of, look at how beautiful everything was back then, and everything seemed so much simpler. And I don't, like, obviously they were in the midst of a world war, so I'm not talking about that, but just this idea of the filmmaking and how things looked back then. So that's a trap that I need to be careful not to fall into. And finally, and this is so superficial, but since it's the popcorn section, smiles just don't look right on Rick Blaine. In the flashback scenes,
Never
like, don't smile. Stop smiling, Bogey. It's just not working for you.
He was more of a film noir star, he's
Yes.
that hardened gangster,
Yes.
ruggedly handsome, but like, no smiling. Like,
I need him brooding. Yeah.
I need entirely macho brooding man.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh my gosh. You're kind of right, though. It's almost kind of creepy in a sense. So I don't know. It is interesting, the kind of that they picked him for that role, like, to be like this kind of romantic, but he did have to be hard on the outside. So I guess they picked him, and again, he played it very well, the hard exterior and but gooey on the inside. Just, you are a you're a sentimentalist. That's what you are, a sentimentalist.
Yeah, you are a sentimentalist. Yep.
Well, I also said it was buttered and salted, and I just, again, like, it's kind of one of those iconic movies that I feel like if you don't like this movie, I think you need to watch it again, because, like, this movie honestly probably influenced so many movies that you love. And like me, if you love Steven Spielberg, I honestly see, like, so much of, like, things that Steven Spielberg probably borrowed from this movie, including, like, shooting Nazis and, his obsession with World War II. But Spielberg actually said in an interview that this was one of the best narratives that he had ever witnessed as an audience. And again, like, I just see, like, even in the cinematography and stuff, like, things where, like, he might have borrowed from things like that. And I also thought it was interesting. I was reading so much about this while we were, researching it. So I watched the movie, I watched some video essays, I read some things, read some interviews, read some essays on it. And one of the things I came across was there was an experiment done in 1982. And like you said, it was based on a stage play called Everybody Comes to Rick's. And so they basically took that, and in 1982, they resent it out to a bunch of Hollywood executives and agencies, basically as just to see, like, if that would get made today. And they sent it to, like, 217 agencies. Most of them returned it unread. And of the 85 who did read it, only 33 recognized that it was Casablanca, which is crazy. I mean, that you wouldn't recognize that. But again, it kind of just goes to show that, like, maybe it was one of those movies that was more of, like, iconic for its time. And like I had said earlier, that I honestly don't think it would be made today, because I don't think people would get it. We're so far removed from that kind of story as a culture now, that kind of story doesn't really stir. I mean, it would for certain people, but I think overall, like, if we're just talking about culture overall, it's not going to move people like it did back then. And in my analysis, I'll go more into that, but I want to stick to more popcorn stuff while we're in the popcorn section. And so I also had the Battle of the Anthems as one of my favorite scenes as well. And like you said everything so well about it. It is just this stirring scene of, patriotism. And just like a side note, if you're thinking about it, again, just watching this movie so many times, and certain details like you just don't pick up on, is that Victor Laszlo, the one man who gets them to play the French national anthem, he is not French. He's it's not Bulgarian. Where do they come from again? Now I'm blanking. It was another like
Gosh.
Prussian country, maybe Poland. I'm not remembering now. She said she met him in, and I can't remember.
Yeah, you're right.
But anyway, but he's, yeah, we'll put it in the notes if we remember.
Yeah.
But for some reason I'm blanking on it. But it just like the point is that he isn't French, but he knows he's in a French occupied territory, and he knows that means something to these people, and these Germans are there to kind of put their boot on them a little bit, even though they're still unoccupied in that part, of their country, or in Morocco, French occupied Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just the influence that can have. And it wasn't so much about his national anthem, it was just about getting the people to respond to tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
right.
why it's such a moving scene. And also
Google
just
I'm so sorry. Google says that he
ahead.
was Czechoslovakian. So
Slovakian,
that's
thank you. Yes.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
like totally blanking on it as I was like,
Yeah,
I thought
me
I'd
too.
written this down in my notes, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So thank you, Bridget. Thank you,
Of
Google.
course.
Always thank Google. It has all the answers. But also tying the Battle of the Anthems to recent events. I don't know, Bridget, if you heard about what happened at the USA Canada hockey game.
Yes, I did hear about this. Yep.
So yeah, I've been having a great week watching reels of all of that. Just makes me proud to be an American. Babylon Bee had a great article. It said Canadians boo their future national anthem. It's cracked me up.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, really not a great comparison, but I was just thinking recent news, why not talk about it? But mostly in this movie, all of my popcorn thoughts are basically around the cinematography. It's just, again, so gorgeous and so like counterintuitive to what like a romance typically would be. If you look at, again, in the lobby episode, we were talking a lot about rom-coms, and like if you watch a romantic comedy or even just a romantic film like Pride and Prejudice or something like that, Sense and Sensibility, it's going to be very bright, it's going to be colorful, romantic sunsets, haziness, and you don't really get that in this movie except for like soft focus on Ingrid Bergman. They always make her look, I mean, she's a gorgeous woman, so you can't not make her look beautiful. But like it's very dark. It's a very dark with lots of shadows. It's noir inspired and German expressionist inspired with a lot of sets. Like there's so many like silhouette shots where it's like this bright light coming from behind. In this one scene, Rick is like opening his safe, and you just see a shadow, but it's so crisp. Like his shadow, you can see everything that he's doing. And then the other guy is in the frame too, and you can see him perfectly. It's just like stunning, just the way that they shot that and like what you would have to do to set that shot up. And just so many scenes of like internal turmoil when they're talking with each other, and they've got these bars across their face of shadow because the windows have slats, the blinds, and it just like looks like they're in a prison almost. Again, that's just good cinematography because it's helping to tell the story. It's revealing what's on the inside without them saying it out loud all the time. And it really works for the drama of the story as well. Like this is, I feel like, more of a story about, like patriotism and standing up for what's right than it is romantic in a sense. But it does have a wonderful romance story woven into it so seamlessly, and you're telling it through the cinematography. And like one of the things that I always notice in Casablanca, one of my favorite cinematography elements, is the letter he gets from her at the train station, and it's raining, right? And like Humphrey Bogart doesn't cry. Like you can't have Humphrey Bogart cry, but the letter cries. It cries tears, like the rain is running down it, and the ink is so fresh that the ink is starting to run. and it just like cries these tears of ink, and I'm just like, that is like the perfect way to show like his emotion, his internal turmoil of what he's feeling without making him cry. Like you
Mhm.
didn't need him to cry, and I don't think he's the type of person who would cry. Again, he kind of keeps everything bottled inside. That's kind of part of his character.
Mhm.
But yet you're getting this glimpse into his soul in a sense and what he's going through. And that's, again, that's just brilliant. And I love it. And as I said earlier, just the humor and wit in this movie. Again, it's like, how does it manage to be noir cinematography, a romance story, and just really witty, funny writing at the same time? Because I think one of the best lines in there is right after the Battle of the Anthem scene when the Germans are like, you need to find an excuse to shut this place down because, if you can't win, you just close down the joint, right? So they couldn't sing their song, so they're kicking everybody out. And, the, the French captain is like, well, I don't have a reason or find a reason. And I'm shocked to find gambling going on in here. And then the guy comes over, you're winning, sir. Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out. I just love that. Me and my sisters and I feel like we use that line all the time where we're just like, I'm shocked to find this going on.
That is one of the great moments in this. And like you were saying too, just to have a movie that can bring all of these elements together so seamlessly. Like there are laugh out loud funny moments, but people die in this movie too,
Yeah.
and it takes place during the Holocaust, and we have people who are desperately fleeing their homelands to try to get away from the Nazis. There are so many serious and tragic things happening, but you just get every now and then those moments of levity, and it's in the writing and it's in the performances that they can bring out laughter even in the midst of all this horror that's going on around the rest of the story.
Yeah. Again, I just the writing is just
Mm-hmm.
excellent here. That you can weave all of those elements into one thing, and you can believe all of it. Like
Yeah.
even the sappy romance scenes between Bergman and Bogart. It's like they're not, even though like you would, if any other, like if other actors and actresses had tried to say those lines, it might have sounded sappy, but they deliver it so well.
Yeah.
And you believe them. You believe them. And again, that's secondary characters as well. And even though they have very small roles, it's so believable. And maybe it does tie back to the fact that a lot of them were actually like affected by
Mm-hmm.
the things going on in the world at the time. So,
Yeah.
well, it sounds like we really want to dive into deeper popcorn thoughts. So, like, let's go ahead and dive into the deeper popcorn thoughts. And I think you should start, Bridget. I would love to hear some of the themes that stood out to you on this one.
Okay. Well, and if I can, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about the cinematography really quickly too. First of all, thank you for always being able to bring the visual elements of filmmaking into the conversation, because that is something I really don't know much about, like as far as the technicalities are concerned. And I can pick up on symbolism when it smacks me in the face, but other than that, like when it comes to camera angles and all that kind of stuff, I'm totally lost. So I love that you can bring that in. It was actually just making me think of a scene. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but when Ilsa comes to finally talk to Rick and explain everything about why she didn't meet him in Paris, when he comes into his room and sees her there, she's completely in shadow, and he's surprised by her to see her there.
Yeah.
Then after the unburdening, it turns out that Laszlo comes into the bar because he is being hunted by the Nazis at that moment. And so Rick has to sneak Ilsa out without Laszlo knowing that she came to see him. And so he brings, I believe, Carl upstairs, right? The waiter. He brings Carl upstairs to escort her home. And as soon as Carl opens the door, we see Ingrid Bergman then bathed in light. And I wonder if that is I'm just thinking through this as you're talking about the cinematography, but I wonder if there's the symbolism there of their relationship being cast in shadow. Rick didn't know why she didn't meet him. And so she's in darkness as long as their story is in darkness. And then once we know the truth and Rick finds that all out, then she can be in the light. So
yeah, I'll take it one step further even, because
yes,
that
please.
scene, at the end of that scene, she gets bathed in darkness again when he shuts the door, because she's hiding from Laszlo because she knows her husband's down there.
Right.
And so, yes, like she's unburdened, she's told him, but then at the very end of that scene is kind of when the wheels in Rick's mind are turning, like, okay, we're going to get rid of Laszlo, and me and Elsa, we're going to run off together.
Mm-hmm.
And then that scene ends with her bathed in darkness again. And
Interesting.
so, yeah, it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
kind of that internal turmoil of, well, I burned myself, but now we're going to do the wrong thing, and now
Right.
we're going to go down a dark path
Mm-hmm.
that isn't right. But
Yeah.
yeah, but like great, yeah, that is a great detail, and that's a great scene. And again,
Yes.
lots of play between lights and shadows all
Right.
throughout the movie, but yeah, especially in that scene, it's very
Right.
interesting.
And so, I mean, even I didn't prepare this as a theological talking point, but just in having the conversation now, what a great segue into the
Yeah.
theology section. We know, the Bible has so much to say about walking in the light as Jesus is in the light. So yeah, I think just the visual symbolism there of light and darkness, the Bible would certainly have much to say about that. So as we have said before, this movie was the Patreon pick for the February romance movie, our Valentine's Day movie this year. So I'm very, very excited to get into the conversation about the love triangle. And I know we have that coming up. So I wanted to just bring up just a very quick couple of other theological talking points so that we can then focus most of our theological attention on that love triangle. So the first one I wanted to bring up, this is a point that I find I guess just in living life every day keeps getting reinforced over and over. And I've probably said it in other episodes that I've been on before, but I think this movie just does such a great job of portraying the idea that there is no such thing as neutral. Even if you want there to be, there is no such thing as neutral. And ultimately, any attempt you make to stay somewhere in the middle will inevitably mean you end up taking a side. There's no way to live in such a way that your inaction is meaningless. So even inaction ends up being an action in one way or another. So in the movie, Rick, several times we hear Rick say, "I stick my neck out for nobody." And then Captain Renault says about Rick, he says, "Rick is completely neutral about everything." That's actually a quote from the movie. Even Renault about himself, he says, "I have no conviction. I blow with the wind." Rick, at another point in the movie, says, "I'm not fighting for anything anymore. I'm the only cause I'm interested in." And as I was listening to those quotes come up again and again in the movie on my recent rewatch, I couldn't help but think about the church in Revelation that God describes as lukewarm. So this is from Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 to 17 say, "I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." And that to me, I mean, when I think of Casablanca, that's what I think of. I think more so even than the love triangle is this attempt at neutrality when the world around you is falling apart. And I guess what is hard for me to understand, um, Rick is such an interesting character. It's hard for me to understand, though, why he even wants neutrality when there is so much on the line. And I think you see it's such a great transformation that we get in Rick from the beginning of the movie to the end. But it's his neutrality, I think, starts out of self-interest and self-preservation. I think we can certainly talk about how much of that is the result of his broken heart, that he doesn't want to put himself out there anymore and risk the possibility of being jilted again, whether it's by a woman or just by the world at large. And so he thinks he has this middle ground that he has found. But I missed this on my rewatch, and I was watching the national anthem scene right before we started recording because I just love it. And what I missed and I had forgotten is that Laszlo goes to the band and tells them to play La Marseillaise, and they don't until the band leader looks at Rick, and Rick gives them a nod, and that's when they start to play. So even in that, like we do see Rick start to take sides, and it's like this whole movie is about his, I think, realization that as much as he wishes there was this inconsequential, I guess, middle ground, that he could just stake his claim in a place where everyone will just leave him alone. I don't want to have anything to do with any of this. The movie really is at least partially about him realizing that that is impossible. Even if he doesn't seek out making a stand, the world is going to come to him, and eventually he's going to have to stand for something. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Neutrality does not exist. And I think from the Christian worldview, we shouldn't want it to exist, right? I think we should be on a side. We serve God, period.
Cannot serve two masters.
Exactly. And I think because we have a worldview that acknowledges that we are created beings, we know that we are created to worship. So as Christians, we know that we worship God. But if you don't worship God, you have to replace God with something else. You have to replace God with someone else. And so I think for us, that's where we know that neutrality cannot exist. When you are creatures of a creator who demands your worship, then you have to serve somebody, and you cannot serve two. So
Amen.
I think in pretty much any conflict, there is going to be a right side and a wrong side. And I don't mean to say, like there are obviously places in the Christian life where we have to allow room for nuance. We have to look for balance in so many ways as well. So I'm not talking about those issues, but just in terms of, we have Rick here living in the midst of a world war and trying to remain neutral through it. And that's not a time for inaction. That is a time for Christian men and women to fight for the right. So that to me is just one of the standout theological themes of this movie.
Absolutely.
I love to just juxtapose, and I'm sure we'll get to this when we talk about the love triangle as well, the juxtaposition of Rick and Victor. So I read a few of Rick's quotes before, then Victor, just a couple of his quotes to show the difference between a man who does fight, a man who takes action, as opposed to, or juxtaposed with Rick, who's trying to find this neutral middle ground. Rick actually says to Victor at one point in the movie, "We all try, you succeed." So, there's that. And then Victor, I was trying to type it exactly as he said it, and I may have missed a word or two here, but to paraphrase it, Victor at one point says, "To tell the truth, I'm frightened too." He's talking to Ilsa at this point. The Nazis are around, and so he says, "I'm frightened too. Shall I stay in our hotel room hiding, or shall I do the best I can to fight?"
Yeah.
At another point, Victor says, "If we stop fighting our enemies, the world will die." And I think, given the time period that he was living through, I don't think that was an exaggeration. If the right side didn't win that war, who knows what the world would look like now. And then finally, the last Victor quote that I wanted to point out is Victor saying to Rick, "Welcome back to the fight. This time I know our side will win." Yes, so again, just acknowledging the difference that one man can make in a battle of this magnitude.
Yeah.
So
absolutely
any
love
thoughts on that, Maddie?
Yeah, I was just typing because I was looking up the verse, Jude 3:3, when you're talking about, we can't be neutral. And in Jude 3:3, it says that we must contend for our faith. And contend is like one of those strong words that basically means to fight. You do have to fight. There are many allusions to soldiers in the Bible and how we are soldiers. We put on this armor of God. and we go out and we contend for our faith. And again, that's just like the total opposite of sitting still, doing nothing and being neutral. Because you can't, like, you can be still and know that God is going to help you in the fight. Be still and know that I will fight for you. But you still have to pick a side. Like, you still have to follow God, follow his commands. And his commands are not for you to do nothing. His commands are for you to go out and do something. And we are fighting a war. We're fighting a spiritual war. We may not be fighting an actual physical war, but we are fighting a spiritual one internally. And, it's why it is important to pray and read your Bible and do all those things. That is your way of fighting, and being able to talk with people about your faith, even if it is just about a movie like Casablanca. If you can bring out some theological truth in Casablanca while talking to your friends, excellent. That's contending for the faith in my eyes.
Yep, absolutely. And then just one other quick thing I wanted to mention, because this was something I think I wasn't even really thinking about it while I was watching the movie, but over the past couple of days, as I've just been working back through the movie and like kind of sitting on it, I've just been so struck by the idea of God will preserve his people, even through what we call the Holocaust, any Holocaust. I just, it's so interesting to me in this movie. None of the characters is actually specifically identified as Jewish. I don't know if there's a reason for that.
It might have been a little too politically sensitive at the time, maybe.
Yeah, maybe at that time.
But it's there. But it's there.
Yeah. Right. So no one is out and out identified that way. But at the same time, we know what the story is that we're being told here. These are people who are being persecuted for what they believe, and they are desperate to seek refuge in a different country. And I think, and you had mentioned the national anthem current events situation that we have going on before. And I couldn't help but think just even today about what's going on in Israel and what they as a nation are facing. And I think just we serve a mighty, sovereign, omnipotent, and omniscient God who is not surprised by anything, not even the arrival on the scene of a genocidal maniac who is bent on destroying God's people. And even through that, he will preserve his people. I'm sure the people who lived through World War II and that Holocaust, Christians at the time, I would think, had to have been thinking that they were seeing the end of the world, right? Like that's what I would have thought if I were living back then. But God has a plan, and he has his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. And through it all, it's all going to happen on God's timing. Like we always, I think Christians throughout history have always spent time wondering, like, are we the last generation? Is this it? Like, surely Jesus is going to return. Yes, come quickly. But I just, I think at the end of the day, what we can always find hope and peace in is that no matter whether we're still alive to see it or whatever, we know that we believe in a God we can trust, and we know that our Savior will return. And we hope and pray for that day. And in the meantime, God is doing something, and he knows what the ends are, and wherever history takes us, whatever happens to us, our only job is to serve God, to love our Lord and to serve him, and he will accomplish the rest. So, I just had to mention that was really something that's been in my mind and in my heart for the last couple of days.
Yeah. And again, ties into that whole no neutrality, we're on. The great thing is if you're a Christian, you know how the story ends. You pick the winning side.
Yes.
You pick the side that ends in everlasting peace. Well, let's see what I picked up on here. So I like that you went with that, because that was actually gonna be one of my receives in our lightning round. But I'm glad that you talked about it so in depth, because that is such an important point. I decided to basically go along with the question that I had is this a romance movie? My initial answer was no, I don't think so, but yes, I think that it is. And since it is the romance pick of the month, I wanted to really harp on the romance and what true love was. And I'm going to start with, again, I done some research for this episode, and I had read some essays, and I'm going to quote from this essay. But first, I do want to read the quote that I'm kind of basing this on. It's like at the very end of the film, and it's Rick, and he's talking to Ilsa, and he says, "If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life." It's a very short little line, but it's just packed with so much and kind of what this whole story is about. And so the essay that I'm going to quote from, I pulled a couple quotes from it. It's from the Library of Congress blogs. They were talking about, introducing Casablanca into the film archives. And this essay was written by Jay Carr, like in commemoration of it. And I started reading this essay, and I was kind of laughing because this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's kind of like this film is being introduced into the film archives, like this movie is being preserved as an American classic, and he's kind of bashing it, which is so typical, I think, of what we do nowadays. So let me read. He says, "It's still the same old story, maybe more so. Casablanca was never a great film, never a profound film. It's merely the most beloved movie of all time." And then you skip a little forward. "Apart from the fact that Paul Henreid's Victor Laszlo is such a saint that he's irritating, you don't want to see Bergman's Ilsa Lund go off with him. She's obviously strong and strong-willed, that you're disappointed to just see her knuckle under and go off and do what she's supposed to do. Her appeal is precisely that she'll let her feelings lead her to what she's not supposed to do. You feel passion is being subordinated to an abstraction. You want her to second-guess Rick and not go." And that's Jay Carr, everybody. And I just want to say I wholeheartedly disagree with his entire analysis of this film. And to be honest, he doesn't get it. He wholly misunderstands the story and what it's about. This is not a modern story. This is not a movie about romantic love. It's about sacrificial love, or love within the right boundaries. And I kind of want to talk about, so we have like these different loves that we talk about. I know in our Sunday school classes before, we've kind of talked over some of these. There's like 7 different types of love. There's like eros, philia, storge, pragma, agape. We know some of these. And most romantic movies are about eros, romantic love. That's what we think of. But this movie is not about eros kind of love. It's about an agape, which is a sacrificial kind of love, and why this had to win out. And we see this so much again in these modern stories. We like to blur boundaries. We like to say that anything goes, but the Bible makes clear lines. It makes clear distinctions. Sex is a good thing. God never says it isn't. Sex outside of marriage is a bad thing. So there's a line that you can't cross. Like wealth is not necessarily in itself a bad thing. Trusting in your wealth over God's sovereignty is bad. So all these things like ambition and love and fear, they can all be good or bad depending on the boundaries that God has set and how you're viewing them through those lenses. And what this Jay Carr guy doesn't understand is that this story is actually within the right boundaries of what love can and can't be. So for fear of being cliche, because I know we talked about it during our In the Lobby episode 2, I'm going with the 1 Corinthians 13 passage, the love passage. And I'm sure people are tired of hearing this one. I'm a wedding photographer. I've heard this passage more times than you will ever hear in your entire life, I assure you. I've heard it so many times that honestly, sometimes I think it's become meaningless to me, which is really sad because, guys, this is a beautiful passage. Like, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter how many times you've heard it. This is what God is saying that love is and isn't. Because it clearly defined lines. And love can't be hurried because love is patient. It can't be mean because it's kind. It's generous. It doesn't boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And watching this movie this time around, I just thought, I think that Rick and Laszlo demonstrate all of these virtues. And that's what makes this story a beautiful love story. And in this movie, we see that everybody goes to Rick's, even the owner of the Blue Parrot, which is kind of the rival bar casino thing. People like Rick, which is funny because he's such a cynical guy and everyone tells him so. Everyone's like, you're such a cynical guy, Rick. But the thing is, I think they see this cynical shell, but they sense the real man that's underneath and they're drawn to that. And you can be that as a Christian. Like, people are drawn to the light that you give. Don't hide your light under a bushel. You got to be the light. And again, his "I stick my neck out for no one" is simply not true. It's only a defense, because throughout this whole movie, he regularly sticks out his neck for those in need. He proves it time and time and again. And even Renault notices that, again, he has a suspicion that he's a sentimentalist at heart. But especially with the Bulgarian refugee, Anina, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but the girl that he talks to who's asking him about Renault, and it's such a poignant little scene, and it really does show Rick's true character because, and again, this is in the age of Hollywood where they didn't explicitly say anything, but like basically Renault is kind of sex trafficking in a way, and he likes to let the beautiful women, they talk about it, who need their visas, into his office alone. Again, implication, you're implying certain things, and basically that's what this refugee is kind of wondering about, and she's asking Rick for his advice about what she should do, if it's okay to do a bad thing in order to get something that's good. And he ends up rigging the gaming tables so that her husband can win enough money so they can get their exit visas. And again, he would rather lose money because, again, he talks with his the guy at the table. He's like, well, we're going to be a couple, grand short this evening because you let him win, basically. So Rick lost out on a lot of money in order to not let this young girl basically sell herself for an exit visa. And like, you notice how all his friends receive him after that. Like, they all hug him and they're like, oh, that was so great that you did that, Rick. Like, we're so glad that you did that. That, like, they knew he was capable of it and that he wouldn't really let that happen. And like you said, it kind of ties into the neutrality thing. He's not neutral. He knows that there's good and bad, and he knows what can and can't be allowed. And he does the same thing with Ilsa. He gives up his own chance to escape with her and live that, happy, sappy, romantic life, and get rid of her husband in the process. Like, he would just have win-win-win, by running off with her. But instead, he gives up his place to the man who has the proper place in her relationship. And the thing is that Rick had every opportunity to do the wrong thing. As Ilsa said, to think for the both of them, and decide that his needs trumped Laszlo. But he knew deep down it was wrong, and that he couldn't let Ilsa make that choice. Mm-hmm. And that honestly is deeply romantic to me, to not let somebody do that to themselves, to not let someone make that wrong choice, to sacrifice basically your fleshly needs and recognize that that isn't your place and you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't be there. And I also think one of the interesting things that happens in this movie is that he even confesses his sins basically to Laszlo, just to be completely clear that he will never come between them again. So not only does Ilsa know, but Laszlo does as well. There's nothing left open-ended. And I was just thinking, if this movie came out today, it wouldn't end like that. people would hate that, and they do apparently Jay Carr doesn't like it. And I can't help but feel they would slip like or insert like a knowing look between Rick and Ilsa before, you know, leave, like maybe she looks back, you know, and they have this moment, or maybe Rick slips a piece of paper into her pocket, or instead of that iconic last line, you know, instead maybe something like I'll find her someday somehow, and leave us with that hope of them getting together, which is what he was getting at in the essay. Like he wanted them together, but he didn't understand that that was the wrong thing to want. And but instead, these writers, instead of giving us that hope basically of like Rick and Ilsa getting together, they leave us on the runway as Ilsa and her husband fly away, stuck with Rick, knowing that we've done the right thing and that we can now finally move on with our lives, basically, because Rick has been stuck in this place. Again, like we were talking about earlier, this whole story takes place basically in one setting. But even at the end of the movie, even though you're still there, you know that now we can move on. We were stuck for a reason. We were learning a lesson. And now both Ilsa and Rick can move on from what happened. And I just think it's genius writing, and it's morally satisfying, which is what we don't get nowadays a whole lot with these kinds of movies, especially, is like a morally satisfying ending. We could never root for their love story, honestly, because it's wrong. And I honestly think they left the details of the relationship vague kind of for that reason, because this time watching it, I kind of was thinking, I'm like, but again, Bogart and Bergman sell us this love story with looks and just good acting, but we are never shown a real reason why do they love each other. I honestly don't know. Like, and they never talk. Like, they even say like no questions.
No questions.
Like
Yep.
about what happened before. It's like, I mean, I love you guys, but like, why do you love each other? It's left for, you know, it's left up to kind of audience interpretation, but that kind of makes it easier to give up that romance at the end because it was never meant to be. And they even give Ilsa a few moments of chemistry with Laszlo too, that I love, you know, just to kind of ensure that we're not entirely rooting for Rick the whole time. Like, you know, that again, the Jay Carr was saying that he's such a saint that it's irritating, and I'm like, but he's not. He's not. He's a real guy, and he knows more than he lets on. A lot of times, like I think honestly he knew that something had happened right away between Rick and Ilsa. Like, I saw you guys look at each other. He's like, I know something happened. He's not stupid, but he's so self-sacrificial that people think that's irritating in a way. And I'm like, how can you? I don't know. I think that's interesting that you would think that. That the morally upright character is somehow, I'm trying to think of the word, prudish or something, you know, but he's not. He was very understanding. He never, again, that love, never remembers wrongs, you know, past wrongs, and he's never going to hold that against Ilsa. Like, you know that about him. So he also demonstrates, you know, that beautiful kind of love that always protects, always perseveres. You know, he's not just a boring do-gooder. And I mean, he proves it by asking Rick, you know, again, kind of knowing that Rick loves Ilsa and asking him to save her instead of him. And like, you just save my wife, you know, you can forget about me, but save her. Again, that self-sacrificial, at least, you know, if he can't save his, you know, please save Elsa's life. And that makes me love him even more. And that makes Rick's decision all the more clear. Like, this man is worth protecting. This movie is about sacrificial duty, not passion. And that may sound unromantic when you say it like that, but I think all you have to do is watch the movie to see how romantic it really is, and, you know, read the Bible too.
Yeah, right. I mean, my goodness, Maddie, that's incredible. What a great distillation of what is going on with that love triangle. And I think just to throw in my 2 cents. I think I also had read that essay from Jay Carr over the last couple of days at some point. So I thought the same thing. What like, oh my goodness. It's such a perfect microcosm, I guess, of modern day sensibilities when it comes to, if we can even call them sensibilities, when it comes to this idea of love. I think the whole point of what we see happen at the end of Casablanca is those filmmakers, those writers saying that there is a deeper kind of love than attraction. In the end, attraction doesn't matter at all. What you're willing to sacrifice and the actions you're willing to take for your loved ones, that's what matters. And we even see, like, Laszlo himself asks Ilsa if there is a history between her and Rick. Yeah. And she doesn't answer. She says no. Actually, I shouldn't even say that she doesn't answer. She says no. So she lies to him. And I think she thinks it's all for the, like, she's trying to just put it behind them and not even have it be a thing that they have to talk about. But we can see her in that moment of lying to her husband. And then also in the moment when she says to Rick, I can't think anymore. I need you to think for both of us. If it were up to Ilsa, there could be a very, very different ending to this movie where she is about to just give into her passion. That's the way she wants the movie to end. Is with staying with Rick and being together with him. And what we have is, I think, whether it was intended to be this way or not, but this, I think, is what it looks like. Even, I know Rick is not her husband, but we see a picture of what it looks like for a man to be the leader in the relationship. And you have Rick coming in and saying to Ilsa, okay, I've done the thinking. You asked me to do the thinking. I did the thinking. And the thinking is, you need to stay with your husband. I mean, like, we cannot lose sight. And this is, like, I think that's something that Jay Carr does not get. We cannot lose sight of the fact that Ilsa is married to Laszlo. This is not, like, they aren't just dating or, you know, like, this is not some pre-marriage phase for them.
Teenager love story.
Yeah. They are married to each other. So to desire any ending other than Ilsa and Laszlo ending up together is sinful. I mean, like, it's anti-biblical and it is sinful. And it would have been so easy to get that ending anyway, you know, but I think that's the beauty of this movie, is that there is this self-sacrifice at the end. We see Laszlo sacrificing himself for the cause that he's fighting for all throughout the movie. And it takes Rick a little while to catch up. But once he gets there, it's like,
he's all in.
Okay, yes, this is what it looks like for me too. He held on to the idea of Ilsa for too long. And by the end of the movie, finally realizes that that is what was poisoning him. And he finally gets himself to the point where, like, we'll always have Paris. We can always remember what we had, but you need to be with your husband. He will not make it through this whole endeavor that he has of trying to lead this resistance movement. There's no way he can do that without you by his side. And so he very lovingly pushes her to do her wifely duty as well. It's not even just about Rick's self-sacrifice. He is propelling Ilsa to her own form of self-sacrifice as well.
Well, and she has her own part to play too.
Right,
it's not totally that, like, this is all Rick, you know, and it's all his doing. But it's like, no, Ilsa, you're important to the work as well. Like, you know things about him, and he needs you. It's kind of like being a pastor's wife in a sense. I get that feeling, where I feel like a lot of times pastors' wives are burdened with a lot of things, and they are there to, you know, help their husbands in any way they can. And that is a hard job. I think it's just a hard job, I'm sure, to just help your husband. I'm speaking as an unmarried woman, but I have, you know, my siblings are married, and I see that in my parents, and it's a hard thing. But again, you made a choice, and you're choosing to be there for that person. And that is your duty. You know, that is the sacrifice that you have to make on the daily, is to give up and love for this person. And be there for them.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting too. I'm only just thinking now, I believe even when we see Rick and Ilsa getting together in Paris, we really only have Ilsa's word for it, that she only just found out that Laszlo was still alive when she was supposed to meet Rick. I'm almost wondering, because I think there's a great scene where Rick is talking to her about getting married. Why don't we just go get married?
Yeah, and she's very uncomfortable.
On her face, like she turns her face away from him, and the look on her face, like, it's not just like, I'm a widow in mourning right now. It's almost, I don't know, you could almost read that as like guilt. Yes, like, does she already know at that point that her husband is in fact still alive?
Because she said they sent her like a letter the day before they left Paris, and that was the day before they left.
So maybe she had just found out.
So I think she had just found out about that, and so she was feeling very guilty about it. But again, I think we can praise her in that sense that she did the right thing there, honestly, by leaving him. Again, like, if we go back, there are certain choices that she made that were the right choice. You know, it's like she knew that she couldn't stay with him. Once she found out her husband was alive, it was like, I can't go with you, even though she had the opportunity to. But again, kind of that chemistry pulled them back together in Casablanca, and she kind of wanted to make a wrong decision, but that's what sin does, right? It tempts us. It tempts us with those opportunities to do it. And if she was given another opportunity and she wanted to give in, but thankfully Rick was like, no, we can't. You know, I know what the right thing to do is. Now I know. So, well, anyway, we have had so many good discussion points on this. I feel like we could talk about it forever. So why don't we get into a quick little lightning round and see if there's anything to receive, reject, redeem here. So get our lightning in. And did you have anything? Because I'm trying to think. I had one, so I had a reject, and it was, we kind of already talked about it, but I'll just reiterate it real quick here. It's when Laszlo asks Ilsa if there's anything that she has to tell him, and she says no. She should have come clean, but again, that would have, we had to ink out the plot a little bit more there. But she should have told him everything. And again, I think Laszlo pretty much, he knew. But it's kind of like in the Garden of Eden, and God was like, why are you hiding? He knew why Adam and Eve were hiding. So it's kind of what Laszlo's doing here. It's kind of like, is there anything you want to tell me? I'm like, I'm giving you the opportunity to come clean. And like, and he didn't seem angry at all either. He seems like the type of guy who would listen to that, and then he would be like, I forgive you. Like, no questions asked. But she says no because she is afraid because of how she's feeling in that moment. So I would reject, again, doing that, don't, I think we should take the opportunity, more to confess our sins to one another. I think that's something we don't always like doing. We're not comfortable doing, but it is very healthy to do. Just to say like, hey, I did this. I've either wronged you or I've wronged somebody. It's kind of like having an accountability partner. It's like it helps you to do more of the right thing, because maybe if she had told him, then he could have talked to her more about it, and maybe she would have come to that conclusion on her own instead of Rick having to do it. So just food for thought.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great point. I was just thinking that through as well, that maybe the whole outcome could have been different if she unburdened herself in that moment, because he was giving her the opportunity. He was offering, he even said to her, I know I would have been lonely in those circumstances, so you probably were too. Is there anything you want to tell me? And like he was there for it. He was trying to help her and support her. So definitely reject lying to your spouse. For sure.
Definitely reject. That feels obvious, but we'll say it.
Let's just wrap that up. I think an idea to reject is basically everything we brought up in that essay by Jay Carr about this film. The elevation of lust, basically, over true self-sacrificial love, I think 100% needs to be rejected. And I think that's why we feel so strongly that he is so wrong in his analysis of this film, because he's missing the entire point of the whole point, like I said before, is that the lust love is not the better choice. The loyal, tested, marital love is the lasting one.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think everything that you read from him, Maddie, from that essay that he wrote, we can just throw that right in the garbage.
David, throw in a garbage sound effect right here.
Can we get a disposal
Throw it
or
in the
something?
trash. Yeah. Shredding paper. I'll just make the sound effect. All right. So is there anything that we could receive or redeem from this one?
I think, I mean, if we flip that coin around, then I would say let's receive self-sacrificial love. I think that is really the measure of love. Love at some point has to be defined by action, right? We cannot sustain the feeling,
Just
the
a feeling.
romantic feeling. Yeah, like it's going to go away at some point. So once that feeling goes away, what are you willing to do to fight for especially in the context of marriage? What are you going to do to fight for your marriage, to fight for your spouse, to keep pursuing your spouse even after the feelings are gone? And life just comes in, and you have all these things to deal with. So I think just receiving that idea that love needs to be based in action.
Yeah, it's a choice at that point,
Right.
Like you may not like your spouse very much, on a particular day or a particular minute, but you can't stop loving them.
Right.
So yeah, again, that choice, that action, it has to continue. And yeah, love's a verb.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I would receive / redeem just Laszlo's entire character. He really, I mean, he is set up as the saintly character in this movie, and
kind of a Christ-like, sacrificial
yes,
figure.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's meant to be a foil for Rick, so we can juxtapose them and see them up against each other and compare them. So, and the thing is, no human being is perfect. So there would be things about Laszlo even that we would have to redeem as opposed to outright receiving. But I think the picture that we get from his character is that right versus wrong. You get yourself on the right side. You ally yourself with what is right. You fight for that. You're willing to sacrifice as needed to do what you feel called to do. And we see him leading this great resistance movement. The way that the Christian would look at that is that God is raising him up for this moment to participate in this fight. And he's not resisting that. He is wholeheartedly giving himself to that calling. So yeah, I think, I could go on for a long time about Laszlo, but lots of receives and redeems.
Ties into another receive that we can take from this, which is basically receive the role you're given. Because again, kind of the ending is everyone accepts what that they should be. Even characters like Renault, Captain Renault, he becomes a better person too by other people making good decisions around him. Because again, he was a blow with the wind type person, but when it came down to it, he knew what the right thing was to do as well, and he knew that the Nazi captain was bad. And he ends up that again visual. He throws the bottle of Vichy in the trash because earlier he had said, "I blow wherever the wind comes," and right now it's coming from Vichy. Saying that I'm with the Germans. I'm going to help them however I can. And then that bottle goes in the trash at the end. And then that iconic line, "This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," where I think that Captain Renault is even going to do some real good in his position now instead of what he's been doing as an opportunist, basically, of taking advantage of people and using them for his own means. And just kind of, and that ties into the idea of when you're a good witness and when you're making those good decisions, people see that. When you're a Christian, you're letting your light shine before others. That can also change people around you. People feel a difference. And that's kind of how Rick was. When he was being cynical, he was kind of drawing some cynical people to himself, like Captain Renault and all that. But when he started to change, and he started, again, Laszlo, kind of, again, the initial figure, he makes a stand, which in turn makes Rick take a stand, which in turn makes Renault even take a stand, which you're like, what, Renault is taking sides now? The guy who wouldn't ever take a side? And so it kind of has this chain reaction effect that we would hope the gospel would be you're kind of infecting people with with that goodness and that truth and that beauty. I think that's a pretty good place to end on. Again, we could probably talk way more about this, have a lot more to receive from this one, but we're gonna let the credits roll on this episode, but please keep the conversation going. And although we will leave you, we think this is the start of a beautiful friendship. So until next time, keep engaging movies and media from a godly perspective, and remember that you are not a mindless consumer.
You must remember this. A kiss is just a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.